Hi everyone, my name is Lindsay Fauntleroy. I'm the founder of Oceans and Rivers, and I'm an acupuncturist and integrative counselor. And in my work, I bring together Western psychology, Eastern medicine, and ancestral magic, our ancestral magic. And so, as this conversation about coronavirus and COVID 19 has been circulating around the world, I thought it would be a good time to introduce or reintroduce some of the understandings that we can learn from Indigenous ways of thinking about the mind and the body. I'm going to be totally transparent. A few weeks ago, I was experiencing symptoms of the coronavirus: flu, fever, chills, aches, extreme and extraordinary fatigue, unlike anything I'd experienced before, dry cough, and chest tightness. And like I'm sure thousands of folks here in New York City, I called my doctor, I had a virtual session, and they told me that, yeah, I probably did have the virus, but I wasn't sick enough to get tested because there weren't enough tests and not enough beds and all of that. And so my best bet was to stay home and ride it out, which I did. And luckily, I'm on the other side of that experience. But being bedridden for 2 weeks really gave me an opportunity to contemplate what's going on with COVID 19 and the coronavirus. And I'd love to share with you some of the understandings that Chinese medicine, ancestral wisdom can bring to us in terms of understanding how do we move forward from this as a collective and as a community. And so we're going to look at COVID 19 and the water element through four different lenses. We're going to start off talking about COVID 19 and the water element as forces of nature. And I know there's a lot of stuff out there about COVID 19 being man made. I don't know what's true and what's not, totally transparent. But we do know that it would take a force of nature to shut down New York City. And so we're going to talk about that force of nature as the water element and what's showing up as a signature of that. We're also going to look at the water element and how it resonates in our minds and our hearts. And that's really going to help us to understand the thoughts and the feelings that we might be having as we move as a society through this pandemic. We're going to look at COVID 19 in the body, not just from a physical perspective in terms of symptoms, but looking at the energetics and the meridians of the water element and how they are related to COVID 19, which is a little bit of a departure because a lot of my colleagues are talking a lot about the respiratory system, a lot about the immune system, which I think is absolutely relevant. But looking at it through the lens of the water element gives us another perspective of ways that we can keep ourselves safe, happy, healthy, and whole through this crisis. And then finally, we're going to be looking at some soul medicine. So that is lifestyle choices and changes that we can be making along with flower essences, which are my absolute favorite way to nurture the soul and provide healing through times like this. So let's start off talking about COVID 19 and the water element as a force of nature. Now, when I say the water element, there are 5 elements in Chinese medicine: water, wood, fire, earth, and metal. And each of those 5 elements is an archetype. It relates to a color, a sound, an odor, an energetic, a movement. Each of those elements has a core emotion that's associated with it, has times of the year that they show up. Each of those elements has an aspiration or personality traits, and each of those elements has a spiritual force or understanding, and enlightenment that it teaches us. And so when we're looking at COVID 19, we're invited to invite all of these associations into thinking about this crisis in a new way. The 5 elements emerged out of what's called the alchemical period of humanity. And that's the time where there was a transition from being nomadic cultures that kind of followed the seasons and the times in nature, that kind of oneness with nature, that we think about mythically, and moving into stationary agricultural societies. So, what did that mean? And how did the elements and our understanding of the elements emerge out of that? And what the heck does that have to do with COVID 19 in 2020? So, let's take a look. So, when we understand that during this alchemical period, this was the time that humanity was able to stand still and start to see the world moving around us. So from this single solitary place where I'm planting and cultivating crops, and the earliest agricultural societies was, of course, the Nile Valley. So we're talking about those 3 seasons of the rising and falling and flooding of the Nile River. But being able to see that, life has this kind of cyclical pattern. The stars come back to a place. So we're talking about the roots of early astrology. We're talking about this ability to stand still and watch the seasons circling around us. And out of this alchemical period comes this understanding of as above, so below, as within, so without, and the last part that is not as common, as the universe, so the soul. And so from these ancient alchemists, we get this understanding that whatever is going on in the world out there, whatever we can experience externally, is a metaphor or a representation for something that's going on inside of us. And the 5 elements originate out of that kind of consciousness. This consciousness that as we watch the seasons change, water, wood, fire, earth, and metal, as we watch these seasons change, that each of these elements represents something within our soul. And so if we're looking at COVID-19, and I'm associating it with the water element, and hopefully after this video you'll understand why, that there is something that is available to us on a soul level, that if we're just focusing on the health crisis and the health pandemic, we are going to miss something that could be really brilliant and beautiful for humanity right now. So some of the things that we learn from understanding this kind of indigenous approach to the mind and the body is that, first of all, time is not linear in this way of thinking. Time is cyclical and symbolic. So when I see these stars in the sky, it is a symbol of this type of energetic happening. Or when I see these plants starting to sprout, that is a metaphor for something that is sprouting or blooming or blossoming or dying inside of myself. And it's not a medicine that is about cause and effect. Listen, I can't tell you why this is happening. And that's not my goal here. My goal here is to help us to look at the patterns and this emergence of associations, or what we could call signatures, of the water element, and how that emergence of these patterns can give us insight into how we move forward in understanding what we are up to right now as a collective. So through this video, we'll be looking at the signatures of the water element and what it can teach us about COVID-19 and how we can move forward together. So one of the first things that it might be helpful for us to look at is the first signature of the water element that we see with COVID-19 is in the timing. And so if we look at this Tai Chi symbol, you might be familiar with it, but think of it as a clock of the year, where this white side represents the sun and this dark side represents the yin or the moon, and this alternation between day and night. And so understanding this as a clock, we see that the water element peaks here at the winter solstice when this yin, this lunar energy, starts turning into yang and rising again. Well, why is that important? When we're looking at signatures and associations, we're thinking about the timing in which something happens. And COVID-19 really exploded in the height of the water element. So in the end of December of 2019, we see here would have been around about this time. And that's when the World Health Organization was first informed of the cluster of cases in Wuhan city in China. And then the first death was reported in January 11th, and the World Health Emergency was declared, the pandemic, on January 13th. So all of this is happening, this explosion of COVID-19 is happening right in the season of the water element. And so that's one of our first cues that it's like the water element put her stamp on it by saying, okay, you're coming right now, that's my stamp. And so that's one of the first cues that ties us into the water element and the signatures of what we can be learning from the water element. So let's talk about that a little bit. If we're saying that the water element has its stamp on COVID-19, then of course all of the feelings and the emotions and the thoughts that we're having are going to be really closely associated with the water element. So let's take a look at some of those. The energetics of the water element. So when we think about the water element energy, it sinks chi. So the easiest way to understand this, and chi is basically life force or energy. So it submits to gravity, it's flowing downward, and one of the easiest ways to see this is when we think about water and how it always seeks the lowest level. So water will descend, 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 descend. It'll go down, 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 all the way presumably to the center of the earth till it can't go down anymore. And then there's like that winter solstice, spontaneous rising of yang that happens at the depth of the water. But the water element in our soul and our psyche is related to both introspection, fear, and wisdom. And we see that those stamps are really some of the energetics that have guided our response as a society to the coronavirus. The first signature that we can look at is introspection and introversion. So the water element is an element that brings us deep within ourselves and tunes our gaze inward to find the answers. And so with the shelter ins, with the being told, okay, you can't work right now, you have the time and the space to get up close and personal with the inner workings of what you're thinking and feeling. Many of the people that I've worked with or seen in my practice virtually in this time are doing this deep dive, this exploration into the things that are going on internally, the parts of our life that we are contented with, the parts of our lives that we are ready to change. But it's an invitation to look inside for answers and for deeper meaning and for truth. And so we have another signature of the water element, which is just stay home. The shelter in, it's causing a city that would normally be very extroverted, very externalized, the city that quote unquote never sleeps, speaking of New York, but also across the country, we're being told to stay home, to incubate, to hibernate. And that's another signature of the water element. The water element is very much about being at home, keeping everything very close, and not externalizing our energy. As we deepen into that staying home, that introversion, that introspection, we come to another signature of the water element, which is isolation. And when the water element is in balance, we can sink into this isolation and these feelings of depression, of being alone in the darkness, in those depths. And so finding really innovative ways to connect to loved ones creates an important balance for the water element during this time. And we've seen a lot of that, right? We've seen some folks finding creative ways to play games online, doing family check-ins, and all kinds of ways to stay connected and join community to counter that isolation that the water element threatens us with when it is out of balance. Another signature of the water element is fear. And each of the elements has a core emotion, and fear is the emotion that is really associated with the water element. But it's not just fear. That fear can manifest as panic, anxiety, phobias. It can manifest as paralysis, this inability to make any movement or any decision. It can manifest as distrust. It can manifest as hysteria. And that was one of the first things that we started seeing with the coronavirus, is that there was so much fear around catching the virus, fear around loved ones catching the virus, fear around not having enough stuff to weather the storm of a quarantine. There was just so much fear triggered. That fear still persists and is resonating deeply, deeply, deeply with the water element within our souls. Another signature of the water element is survival. The water element teaches us how to survive in the world, and so that fear is not just in our minds. This circumstance has really challenged our fears and insecurities about survival. The water element is closely associated with the root chakra. And in the modern context, that survival is not just about being healthy, which of course it does relate to, but it's also about having the financial and material needs met. So fears around, do I have enough food? Do I have enough money to pay my rent or my mortgage or to get groceries now that I'm not working? How will I make a living? Those deep resonances of fear and terror and concern are all signatures of the water element and how the water element guides us to our safety and survival. But the water element also teaches us that our fear can become cautious action. So the water element gifts us with the ability to be alert and responsive without descending into hysteria and terror and panic. So if we can settle into the messages of our fear, we can have clarity on the actions that we need to take to keep our family safe, to keep ourselves safe. Whether that means getting masks, whether that means not going out of the house and having things delivered, whatever that means for each of us, when we're moving from a place of cautious awareness instead of just fear, we're able to see the actions that we need to take and we become aware and prepared, which is what the water element really is asking of us during this time. Another aspect of the water element, another signature, is trust. And the fear brings us to the edges of our sanity and our reason, but it also offers the opportunity to surrender and to trust. And in the water element, we learn that knowing is overrated and sometimes impossible. So, for many of us right now navigating this crisis, it's impossible to know how it's all going to turn out. It's impossible to know what our jobs will look like, what our families, how they might change or transition during this time. But one of the phrases that I love to say when it comes to the water element is, it's above my pay grade. And that surrender to the unknown and trusting that it's okay to not know something intellectually or consciously, that it's okay to not have to figure it out, but to really be able to trust and surrender and wait for that awareness, that insight to come from another kind of knowing. And it's a kind of knowing that does not just involve our minds, but is the knowing of our souls, of our bodies, of our ancestors, of our spiritual guides speaking to us, and us leaning into that kind of trust. When we are able to trust and surrender, the water element brings us another signature, which is wisdom. Through stillness and contemplation, we can find the wisdom of right action. We can find the wisdom to guide our steps. And we don't have to rush to find solutions intellectually. We're invited to witness what happens when we allow ourselves to rest in uncertainty and allow for something new to be revealed through our introspective, contemplative practice of the water element. We find surrender and wisdom and trust to counter the fear and anxiety that we may be feeling. So now let's talk a little bit about the body, because as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, there's a lot of conversation about the respiratory and very real respiratory impact of COVID-19. But if we look at the COVID-19 through the lens of the water element and the meridians of the water element, we start to see something a little bit different that can also inform how we take care of ourselves this season. So just backing up a little bit, what are the meridians? The meridians are channels of energy or chi or life force that flow through our bodies like rivers. It's actually where I got the name, part of the name Oceans and Rivers from. And these meridians are currents of electromagnetic energy that carry not just energy, but consciousness and intelligence. So they bring with them ways of thinking, perspectives. You can think of them as like rivers of light, I think is the best way to think of the meridians. They're like rivers of light flowing through our body, giving energy to different parts of our body, giving us clarity in our minds so that we can talk and speak and interact with the world. The chi flows into our heart through our meridians, giving us the capacity to love and care for the world and engage with the world. They flow through every aspect of our body. And each of the elements has a pair of meridians, a yin and yang pair of meridians that bring energy and life force and consciousness to the various parts of our body. And when we started translating acupuncture and Eastern medicine into a Western biomedical lens, the names of the meridians are pretty much now governed by the organ systems that they are closely aligned with. So we have the stomach and spleen meridian, the small intestine and heart meridian for the fire element, and then we have the bladder meridian and the kidney meridian for the water element. So we're going to talk a little bit about those in just a bit. But if we can picture these rivers of light, these rivers of life force, these rivers of chi flowing through all the different parts of our body, just like the blood vessels bring blood to different parts of our body, or the lymph system brings lymph to the different parts of our body, the meridians bring this light or this chi or this life force to different parts of our body. And just like a river, as we can see here from this fabulous beaver dam, that when there's a blockage in the river, what you have is you have a buildup on one side of the blockage, and we would consider this an excess condition. And you have this relative lack of water on this side of the obstruction, so there's just not enough chi flow. So we would look at this as a deficient condition. So in our meridians, we can either have an excess of chi or energy, or we can have a deficiency of chi or energy, but either that excess or deficiency is an imbalance that we are going to experience as either an emotional disharmony or a physical pain or discomfort. And that is the philosophy of how disease is formed in Chinese medicine, is through these blockages in the channels of light or these rivers of life force that aren't flowing as freely as they could. So we find the acupressure points as these little power portals, or like little swirls of energy, little junction points along these rivers of light and these rivers of chi, where we can regulate the flow in the meridians. So in my practice, of course, I use needles, really fine, thin needles. They do not hurt, to regulate the flow through the meridians as an acupuncturist. I also use moxa, which is an herb that's used externally on points through burning the herb. And then you can also use essential oils, and using essential oils on acupressure points is one of my favorite home-based tools for getting access to these rivers of chi and helping to find balance for them. There's specific essential oils that resonate with certain points and resonate with different meridians. And then last but not least, flower essences. By ingesting flower essences, which are a medicine of light, you're using light to regulate light. And so the flower essences on a consciousness level help to regulate the flow of chi, or what might be causing the obstruction in the first place in terms of faulty thinking, negative stuck emotions, or just overall blocks to our soul's development. So these acupressure points, these acupuncture points along the meridians are these vortexes, these swirls of power where the energy builds and flows and accumulates that we can stimulate both with an acupuncturist, but also through acupressure massage, essential oils, and other tools to get that chi harmonized, balanced, and regulated. So when we're thinking about regulating chi and we're thinking about the coronavirus, we're going to take a look at the meridians of the water element. And the first meridian of the water element that we'll look at is the kidney meridian. And again, like I mentioned, a lot of folks are thinking about the lung meridian, the metal element, with the respiratory symptoms of coronavirus. But what we see with the upper kidney point is that they go right along the side of the sternum or the breastbone, and they directly cover the lungs. They're directly over the lungs. And so by working with the water element, we see that there's a direct correlation to not just the symptomology of coronavirus, but also where it's affecting our bodies. It's affecting the lungs, it's affecting the respiratory system, but the kidney points are have these powerful vortexes of energy where we can regulate and find balance. And so specifically with the kidney meridian or the water element, that extreme fatigue that I talked about earlier, that cough, but not just any kind of cough. It's a dry cough. It's a cough that needs some water. And so we're looking at the water element again. And then also with the kidney meridian, the fear and paranoia, the extreme fear and paranoia that many of us are experiencing is directly associated with the kidney meridian. And it's all connected. So the kidney meridian and the heart meridian are actually two halves of the same whole. It's one long meridian called the Shaoyan. And the fear that we're experiencing from the kidney meridian can also go up and affect the heart, connected meridian, and give rise to symptoms such as heart palpitations, insomnia, anxiety. Lots of folks that I've been talking to are having trouble regulating their sleep right now, or having sudden flutters of activity in their heart. And we can look at that as the disconnect or the disharmony between the fire and the water, the heart and the kidney meridians, which not coincidentally is what happens when there is trauma. And for many of us, this extreme change in our lifestyle, the loss of loved ones due to coronavirus, the loss of businesses, the loss of the lives that we've been comfortable with is a form of trauma. And we can look at the meridians as a way of speaking to the emotional impact of that on our systems. And again, like I said, a lot of folks are affected directly by coronavirus, but even more of us are affected at a heart and soul level by this circumstance. So let's take a look at the yang water meridian, which is the bladder meridian, the urinary bladder meridian. And if we look at the urinary bladder meridian, it goes right along the backside of the body. It goes through the kidneys. And what sits on top of the kidneys but the adrenal glands? And so one of the symptoms of coronavirus, of COVID-19, is extreme fatigue. Other symptoms of imbalance in this bladder meridian are back or neck pain, and involuntary urination, often from fear. And that's significant because a lot of children are wetting the bed because they're internalizing their stress through their body. That's a lot of the ways that children process stress when it's pre-verbal, when they don't have the language to talk about what's going on. And so if you're seeing some bedwetting in your children, this is a meridian that you can massage a bit to help them process this energy a bit. The water meridian, the bladder meridian, also deals with overwork. And to some extent, it deals with that kind of hustle mentality of feeling like I have to get ahead, not having enough. That lack mentality is associated with the bladder meridian when we get really obsessed with having enough, whether that's money, whether that's toilet paper, whatever it is. But the bladder meridian being triggered in this way with the water meridian is also asking us as a society to reevaluate our relationship to work, overwork, capitalism, and all the things that are related to that. Greed, certainly. And then last but not least, like I said, with the adrenals being right over the kidneys, the bladder meridian deals with complete collapse and adrenal fatigue. And so why is that important? Why that's important is because some of the people that are really going to need to be careful, not just this season, but as we come back cyclically around to the next season of the water element, that we have to relearn how to take care of ourselves. We have to relearn how to rest and give our bodies what they need so that we are not constantly depleting ourselves and running on E. And folks that are doing that on a regular basis, I just pray that we can be careful and be mindful of a new way of moving through the world as we, as a society, recover, if you will, from this pandemic. The kidney official of the kidney meridian teaches us courage. It teaches us courage to counter the fear. It teaches us trust and surrender. And the bladder official helps us to take stock of our inner and outer resources. So the bladder meridian is going to help us say, okay, do I have enough money in my account to get me through the next month or two? What do I need to do about that in a balanced way? The bladder meridian is also going to help us say, do I have enough energy to do this meeting by Skype this morning? Maybe not. Do I want to take an extra nap? Do I want to stay in bed? Do I need to do something for my soul so that I can feel ready to go back out and interact with the world, even from my isolated, sheltered in space? So what do we do about all this? What's the medicine? What's the recommendation? So I'd love to look at some soul medicine resources. How do we embrace the gifts of the water element amidst this global crisis? And again, I'm not offering this as a cause and effect. I'm not saying that, in a linear way, COVID-19 happened so we could get to know the water element. I have no idea why this happened, but I am seeing the patterns, and wherever there's patterns, there is a wisdom and an intelligence that can guide us. And so let's look at some of the lifestyle and, of course, flower essence resources that are available to us. So flower essences are herbal remedies for the mind, heart, and soul. And a lot of people get flower essences confused with essential oils. While essential oils are scents that we can use topically, they have a great aroma. Flower essences you actually take internally as an herbal supplement, and they really focus on helping us to shift our perspective, see the world through a new lens, uncover subconscious beliefs and limiting thoughts that are standing in the way of us feeling our absolute best. And they help us to become aware of and process the emotions that we're feeling so that we can really honor change and transformation in our lives. And so I created the line of elementals essences to address the emotions, thought patterns, soul wounds, gifts, and desires of each of the 5 elements. So each of the 5 elements has a series of archetypal essences that you can call on to awaken different aspects of what each element is asking for. So I'll be sharing a few of those at the end of this to support you with flower essences that you can use at this time. You can find them on my website, oceansandrivers.com. So first up is looking at the soul medicine of getting rest and extra sleep. So just coming out of talking about the adrenals and adrenal fatigue and how we are a society that is accustomed to pushing ourselves and pushing ourselves and pushing ourselves even a little bit more. I love this quote from Maya Angelou that gives such wisdom. Each of us needs to withdraw from the cares which will not withdraw from us. And so the water element invites us to take that time and take that care. So getting that rest, getting that extra sleep, not feeling guilty if we decide to take a nap. A nap and sleep are some of the ways that our soul begins to integrate all of the change and all of the things that are happening around us. Soul medicine practice is being instead of doing, and just noticing what our habits are around that, and prioritizing taking time to replenish after exerting yourself, not underestimating that even though you're working from home possibly, or even if you're in schooling your children, or whatever it is that you have going on, to not underestimate how much energy you're using at any given time, and making sure that you are doing the soul medicine of giving yourself a practice of replenishment, whatever that looks like for you. And then also giving ourselves permission to do nothing. You don't have to start a new blog. You don't have to learn a new skill. You don't have to learn a new language. You can simply use this time to rest, to process, to integrate, and to really give yourself permission to do that. There's absolutely nothing wrong if you just come out of this process, not with a new business, but with a new heart and a new way of being in the world. In fact, that might be better for all of us. And so questions to think about during this time, what we're invited to reflect on are, what are the ways that I push myself beyond my limits? How do I replenish myself? Am I even aware of when I am running on E? Like some of us are so used to going. We don't even know when we're tired until we stop and then we kind of pass out. So building that awareness of like, no, I need to slow down today. Even if it doesn't feel like I'm doing a lot, that's part of what the water element is inviting us to re-examine. And then also getting curious with ourselves about how hard it is to pause or to stop. I know for me, even when I thought I was moving slowly, I was still doing the most and I was still doing too much. So maybe I got the flu so that I could just, I don't know, stop. I don't know if anything else would have made me stop so hard the way that made me stop. And in terms of flower essences, the Oasis flower essence is really that flower essence that helps us to replenish. I like to think about it as when our motivation to get up and go got up and went. And so sometimes working with Oasis will relight that fire in our hearts, or sometimes it just really helps us to stop and relax and to be still. Um, the Oasis flower essence helps us to rest so that we can really take stock of what we have the capacity to take on and what our limitations are. And also, it's a really great essence for right now to ease our hearts after prolonged emotional suffering or personal crisis. So, if you were hit particularly hard, whether you lost a loved one or lost your livelihood, then this is the essence that's going to offer some soul support to help you navigate that. And then we can also turn to Oasis if you're one of those people who feels like you've got too much on your plate that you can't stop. And let's be honest, that's real for some of us. Some of us are on call 24/7 in our homes, in our communities, in our work, and we have taken on the responsibilities. Oasis is going to be the flower essence to support you in seeing how you can replenish yourself within the context of your life. And then lastly, Oasis is really about not pushing through with our personal will, but surrendering and trusting to a greater unfolding of life around us. The next soul medicine that we'll look at is Sacred Source. And I love this poem by Rumi. There is a life force within your soul. Seek that life. There is a gem in the mountain of your body. Seek that mine. Oh, traveler, if you are in search of that, don't look outside. Look inside yourself and seek that. And so during this time, we are invited to tune within, look for answers within, trust our intuition, listen to our intuition, and to turn down all of the noise and static that's around us, whether that's coming from other people, whether that's coming from social media, whether it's coming from watching the news, wherever that noise is coming from, and whatever is informing us and contributing to our anxiety and our panic. The sacred source aspect of the water element is inviting us to find some answers from another place. And so questions that we can be reflecting on during this time are, how hard is it for me to be still or alone? Those of us who are more extroverted might be having a hard time just being in the house or being by ourselves, and what is brought up by that. How much noise am I taking in? And then also, how much noise am I creating? Are you the one that is out there making a lot of rah-rah noise? Can you hear your inner knowing and trust it? Can you surrender to not knowing? And what kind of activities help me to connect to serenity, connect to a higher power? Our spiritual practices are really important during this time to help us stay grounded and centered and focused. And the water element has put her stamp on that for sure. The soul medicine for working with this water element aspect. I'm drawing inspiration from Harriet Tubman and her quote, "Every dream begins with a dreamer." And of course, the history tells us that she would have these epileptic seizures, and she would, well, we think they were epilepsy, we're not sure. And she would get these insights while she was in this trance state. And she has said that those insights were revelations from God. And so the soul medicine that we're calling in is really inspired by and archetypally demonstrated by that power to go to another place to get information, to get wisdom, to get guidance. And so some things we can be doing to support that is setting aside time to journal, to pray, or meditate, or chant, whatever it is that's in your practice to go within. And keeping up with the practices that keep you connected to your inner knowing and spiritual guides. For some of you, that may be doing divination readings or pulling cards or casting shells. For some of you, it might be going to church. It might be reading the Bible. Whatever it is that keeps you connected, now is the time to stay connected. And then also carve out some time to be away from the screens, away from your phones, away from social media. Give yourself a little time out or a pause, either once a day or a couple of hours a day, or maybe you do a social media fast once a week and go off the grid for 24 hours. Let your friends and family know where you are before you do that so they don't all freak out. And other ways you can work this magic is writing down your dreams, making space for music and art. If you are not artistically inclined, or if you believe that you're not artistically inclined, now's a great time to bust out those meditative coloring books, or get to doodling, or get to singing in the shower. And then also within your ability, spending some time in nature, maybe going for a walk, opening a window, sitting next to a plant, whatever you can do. But these are aspects of the soul that are going to be asking for some softening of the water element, especially as so much of our activity is online these days. And if you're struggling with any of that or all of that, then you can look to the Sacred Source Flower Essence. This is a flower essence that supports us when we need to trust our intuition as much as, or even more than, the external information that we're getting in. It supports us in working with dreams and journaling. It helps us to balance our activity and our logical thinking and our tendency to try to figure things out and make things happen with a calm and a balanced stillness that we can rely on, knowing that comes from other sources, and getting comfortable with the time of introspection and introversion that is required in order to really deeply listen to that wisdom. And the last aspect of soul medicine, I love this quote from Max Ehrman. Be gentle with yourself. You are a child of the universe. No less than the trees and the stars, you have a right to be here. And the poem goes on to say, whether it is clear to you or not, no doubt the universe is unfolding as it should. And so many of us are experiencing the brokenheartedness of our circumstances. And so the soul medicine that this aspect of the water element invites us to is staying connected to friends and family, to not get stuck in isolation, to make space for laughter, whether that is something like laughter yoga or binge watching your favorite sitcom or getting on FaceTime with some friends or cracking up at social media memes. Whatever it is, laughter is absolutely soul medicine that is really helpful during this unprecedented time. Making sure that you are spending time dancing, moving, exercising, doing something to move the body and increase the vitality, so that those still waters don't get so deep that they drown you. Good sleep hygiene. So for many of us, we got a little off kilter with our sleep rhythms. So setting up a way, maybe you have a nighttime routine, maybe you're going to bed at the same time, maybe you have a special book that you read before you go to sleep, or prayer that you do, but getting back into the rhythm of regulating your sleep, avoiding caffeine. And of course, if you're experiencing signs of anxiety or depression, please seek out support. I know many practitioners, including myself, are offering virtual counseling sessions. You do not have to go it alone. Even if you are living by yourself or quarantined or whatever the case may be, we are all connected, and please reach out if you are experiencing disturbing symptoms of depression or anxiety. And the soul medicine, the flower essence that I recommend is Wholehearted. And Wholehearted gives a little nod to the fire element, relighting the flame of the heart in the midst of this watery time. And Wholehearted is going to be the flower essence that you turn to if you're feeling despondency, hopelessness, sadness, in response to the real shocking events and circumstances that we're finding ourselves in. Wholehearted helps us to rekindle the flames of compassion and courage when we're feeling adversity and when we're feeling disconnected from a sense of purpose and meaning. And so many people that I've talked to are expressing that, especially those who have lost their business or whose businesses have closed, small business owners that are not really quite sure how to navigate this new terrain. And so Wholehearted is going to be a great ally for someone who's feeling that despondency or hopelessness. Lastly, Wholehearted is going to be my recommended medicine for anyone who is withdrawing or isolating instead of connecting, and withdrawing in response to feeling heartbroken or discouraged or unable to cope with this time. So there you have it. I hope this video has supported you in bringing a new lens to thinking about COVID-19 and the coronavirus. I hope it's offered you some resources that you can use to bring healing and wholeness to your mind, your heart, and your soul. And most importantly, I'm hoping that it contributes to us ushering in a new way of thinking about health and how we move forward as a community and as a global society. Again, my name is Lindsay Fauntleroy. Please reach out to me at oceansandrivers.com if you're interested in scheduling a virtual session, if you're interested in training about the 5 elements and ways to work with soul medicine, and of course, if you're interested in having me send out some flower essences to you, you can find that and more on my website, oceansandrivers.com, or you can find me on Instagram and Facebook, Oceans and Rivers. Thank you so much for your time, and be well, everyone. We will get through this, and we will be better for it.